Blessings in Jesus, dear friends. My name is James Jacob Pratt from Memorial Ministries. If you don't know, thank you so much for joining us. I'm coming to you on the second day of the attack on Israel by Hamas. That is, of course, orchestrated and sponsored and funded by Iran, by Raisi and by Khomeini in Iran, who control Nasrallah, who control Hamas, and who control the Houthi situation in Yemen and various other tentacles of Iranian Shia fundamentalism. This is the second day of the attack. At the moment of speaking, more than 700 Israelis have been killed, most of them, not all, mostly civilians. In one music festival, 260 people were shot dead. We've been looking at films of some of you have seen of a dead kibbutznik slung over the back of a motorcycle and people cheering in the streets of Gaza. The civilian was shot dead and they were just parading his body in a parade and laughing and cheering. A young German tourist woman at the music festival. She was a tattoo artist of some description. They stripped her naked after they murdered her and they threw her body into the back of a pickup truck, and they're parading this young German woman's corpse through the streets of Gaza to the cheers and clapping of people. A one-year-old baby was shot directly through the head, among some of the other images we've been looking at. It's probably worse than this. Nobody knows, but the numbers of Israeli casualties are well over 2,000. The number of killed over 700. The number of hostages being taken over 100, but nobody exactly knows, and we may not know exactly for some time. We don't know. There has been something of an international sense of horror at what has happened, much the same as when Putin invaded Ukraine. How long that will last, we cannot see, but it is not uniform. It is not uniform. Hamas has friends in the United States Congress, including Rashida Tlaib of Olmert and Alexander Ortega-Cortez, among others, are opponents of Israel, but Tlaib is a particularly pro-Hamas member of the United States Congress. She, however, is not the only one by any means. Also, even the rival organization, the Palestinian Authority, who was represented in the UN, unfortunately, was on the news media in the United States, siding with and approving of what Hamas is doing, even though they're the mortal enemy of Hamas, and Hamas deposed them from power in Gaza and is threatening to depose them from power on the West Bank. They are still supporting Hamas, what Hamas is doing, the murder and genocide. Of course, the Palestinian Authority is highly funded by both the United States government, by the Biden administration, and by the European Union. In fact, there was even so-called economic aid being given directly to Gaza, which is controlled by Hamas. Any aid, of course, given to Gaza will be controlled by Hamas and appropriated or expropriated for any kind of terrorist purposes Hamas, that is Iran's proxy Hamas, desires. This is being funded by the United States, by the American government, and by the European government. While the mainstream media and most governments are uniform in condemning what's being perpetrated by Hamas, Turkey being an exception, playing both sides, calling for restraint on both sides, which is absurd. That is Erdogan. Nobody is putting the real blame where it belongs beyond a limited point. Right from the beginning, we stated yesterday that this was Iran's doing. It would not happen had Iran not dictated it. If a second front opens up in Lebanon with Hezbollah, it'll be much, much worse than what you see happening in Gaza. Much worse. Thanks to Iran, Hezbollah has 150,000, not simply rockets, but projectiles that include missiles. They can hit anywhere in Israel, anywhere. They can hit any place in the country. There is no place in Israel that is immune, virtually nowhere. They can be hit by missiles. The Iron Dome has been performing splendidly, but it's been being overwhelmed. by some calculations, upwards of 7,500 projectiles have been fired. While the Iron Dome is very effective, like any other system, it's being overwhelmed. Just think of a hairdryer. You may have a good hairdryer, but if you put it too close to a wet surface, it's going to cut out. And it simply has a thermal safety mechanism. It's going to just shut off. Well, that is what's happening. Iron Dome has been stretched beyond its functional capacity, beyond a limited point in some cases. Right now, as we speak, by some reports, Ben Gurion Airport, Lod Airport, is being hit, a place that most of us know very well, and central Tel Aviv. This is nothing like what will happen if Hezbollah enters the war, if Nasrallah is told to attack by the Iranians. This is nothing. This may be a preliminary attack. Therefore, we need to pray and pray urgently. How do we understand what is happening, however, biblically and prophetically? Something we've been saying for some time, but it's appropriate to review given the present circumstances. Look with me, please, for the book of Daniel, chapter 10. In the third year of Cyrus, king of Persia, King Kirush, who was benevolent to the Jews, a message was revealed to Daniel, who was named Belshazzar. And the message was true and one of great conflict, but he understood the message and had an understanding of the vision. The king, Cyrus the Great, Kirush, prophesied by name in the book of Isaiah, was benevolent towards the Jews, but he would fall from power. Darius the Mede, Cyrus the Great, these were benevolent, but a change would take place in Persia, that is Iran. Now remember, the Iranians are not Arabs. They are Persians. They are Indo-Europeans. They are anthropological distant cousins of the Germanic peoples. Their religion is Islam. They took on the religion of their enemy. They are Shia Muslims. However, they are descendants not of Shem, but they're descendants of Japheth, the son of Noah. They are Indo-European people who have become, by culture, a Middle Eastern people and taken on the Islamic religion. The original religion of Iran was Zoroastrianism, which had certain similarities towards biblical Judaism and even some towards Christianity. Something happened in Iran of a spiritual religious nature. Zoroastrianism was eventually supplanted, of course, in the 8th century AD, into the 9th century, following the Battle of Kabbalah. A struggle began to take place, and Zoroastrianism was abandoned in favor of Islam. Iran was Islamized. Now, again, the Arabs and Persians never got along. In the war with Saddam Hussein and Iraq, 1.5 million Muslims were killed by other Muslims. These people don't like each other, but they have something that they hate more than each other. That is Israel, the Jews, and Christians. They hate Israel, the Jews, and Christians more than they hate each other, even though they have no love for each other. The Palestinian Authority and Hamas are the same. They hate each other, but not as much as they hate Jews and Christians. They will stand together. This has to be understood. A change took place in Iran, in Persia, where the peacock throne of Cyrus, that was perpetuated, at least ostensibly, until the Shah of Iran in the 1970s, during the reign of Jimmy Carter, a very weak president that saw the control of Iran go to Ayatollah Khomeini. They grabbed the American hostages in the embassy crisis and so forth, and extreme weakness was demonstrated by the Carter administration, which further boldened the Iranians and led them on their crusade, even against other Muslims, Shia Muslims, they hate Saudi Arabia, and the Emirates, but of course their hatred of Israel and the Jews and their unspeakable persecution of Iranian Christians. I'm not saying Shah Pahlavi was the nicest man in the world. I'm just saying he's a lot better than what has followed him. The peacock throne, dating back to Cyrus, at least as it was officially declared historically, is gone. Something else came to power. But what came to power politically was because something happened in the realm of the spirit. Another religion came to take over. Another religion. Now, Zoroastrianism today is not the Zoroastrianism of the ancient world, and I'm not saying I agree with Zoroastrianism. I certainly do not, with fire veneration and things like this, but they did not have the hostility towards the Jews. The other religion of Iran, which I do not like, but had no hostility towards the Jews and has none, is the Baha'i. The Baha'i. It's basically seen as a cult in the Western world, and it is. It has false and demonic beliefs, but the Baha'is are persecuted by the Shia theocracy, the mullahs as well. So the mullahs persecute anybody who's a threat to them. Sunni Muslims, certainly Christians, certainly they hate the Jews, certainly the Baha'is or anyone else. It is something that is a barbarous regime in many respects. Daniel sees this, and he'd been mourning, mitabeli, he'd been as if someone died for 3 weeks. He didn't eat any food or taste any meat or wine enter his mouth, nor did he use any ointment until the 3 weeks were completed. On the 24th day of the first month, while I was by the bank of the great river, that is the Tigris. Now he has this vision that's true, and it's of a great conflict. I lifted my eyes and look, and behold, there was a certain man dressed in linen, whose waist was girded with a belt of pure gold of Uphaz, and his body was like beryl. His face had the appearance of lightning. His eyes were like flaming torches. His arms and his feet like the gleam of polished bronze, and the sounds of words like a tumult. I, Daniel, alone saw the vision. And while the men who were with me did not see the vision, nevertheless a great dread fell upon them, and they ran away to hide themselves. Now there has been much speculation. Is this an angelic vision? Is it a divine vision? What kind of vision is it? Is it a nefarious vision? So I was left alone and saw this great vision. Yet no strength was left in me, for my natural color turned to a deathly pallor, and I retained no strength. But I heard the sound of his words, and as soon as I heard the sound of his words, I fell into a deep sleep on my face, with my face to the ground. Whatever this was caused him to lose his complexion, to turn into a deathly, like a corpse-like pallor. Then behold, a hand touched me and set me trembling on my hands and knees, and said to me, O Daniel, man of high esteem, understand the words I'm about to tell you and stand upright, for I have now been sent to you. And when he had spoken this to me, I stood up trembling. Now, what we do see here, this is something very acutely takes place in the book of Revelation, where John the Apostle is told not to fear, and an angelic being puts his hand on him and tells him to stand up and not to be afraid. In verse 12, he said to me, do not be afraid, Daniel. From the first day that you set your heart on understanding this and on humbling yourself, behold, your God, your words were heard, and I've come in response to your words. Hence, this is an angelic being. But the prince of the kingdom of Persia was withstanding me for 21 days. This is a powerful demonic force. Then behold, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to me, for I had been left there with the king of Persia. Okay. He was being opposed by the king of Persia. And he was assisted in this battle, this spiritual battle, by Michael the archangel. Again, this points ahead to something we similarly see once more in the book of Revelation. Turn with me, please, if you will, to the book of Revelation. We're looking at chapter 12. Verse 7. And there was a war in heaven. Michael and his angels, Michael Michael, he was like unto God, and his angels waging war with the dragon. That is, of course, Satan coming in the form of the Antichrist. And the dragon and his angels waged war. And the dragon was thrown down, that serpent of old, who's called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was thrown down to earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. And of course, he inhabits the body of the Antichrist. Well, this is Michael. Michael is doing in Daniel what he does in Revelation chapter 12. There's this battle happening in the heavenlies. We need to understand what is happening now is simply a reflection of a battle in the heavenlies. There is a battle in the heavenlies. In Zechariah chapter 12, Jesus made it clear, speaking in the first person, even in the Old Testament, as the eternal Son of God, that he was going to come to Jerusalem. He would return to Jerusalem. In Matthew chapter 23, we see Jesus said the Jews would need to be not only in the land, but in Jerusalem for him to return and say, Baruch haba b'shem Adonai, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. In Luke chapter 21, verse 24, Jerusalem will be trampled down by the feet of the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles is completed. Remember, God's prophetic agenda and the return of Christ depend on the prophetic purposes of God for the true church and for Israel and the Jews. Satan must try to wipe out both. He must try to wipe out the true church, and he must try to wipe out Israel and the Jews to prevent the return of Christ. What you are seeing here is a satanic attack trying to prevent the return of Jesus. That is what underscores what is happening. But understand, the Gazan Arabs, calling themselves Palestinians, are simply stooges, puppets of the Prince of Persia. The Iranian mullahs are controlled by this satanic principality. Ultimately, these things will climax in Daniel chapter 12, verse 1. Once more, we see Michael at that time, the great prince who stands guard over your sons, your people, will arise. There'll be a time of distress such as never occurred since there was a nation until that time. And at that time, your people, everyone who's found written in the book of life, will be rescued. Now, this has an application for Jews who believe, but it has an application for believers. There will be a rescue. Do not believe those deceivers who say there is no rapture. Do not believe them. Do not believe those false teachers and deceivers who tell you contemporary events in the Middle East don't fulfill prophecy. And do not believe those very ignorant people who tell you these things were preteristically fulfilled in their totality in 70 AD. As we pointed out multiple times, as tumultuous as the events of 70 AD were, as predicted by Daniel and Jesus, and as are recorded in Josephus, Wars of the Jews, worse things have happened both to the Jews and to the Christian church than 70 AD. Bar Kokhba's rebellion and the second Jewish revolt in the second century, 120 to 132 AD, was worse than 70 AD. The Holocaust of the 1930s and 40s killed more Jews than 70 AD. More Christians certainly have been martyred in the last 75 years than in all of Christian history, and it's getting worse. Those people who tell you that these things happened in 70 AD, they're radical preterists and say these things have no prophetic meaning, it's already happened in 70 AD, are at best very, very ignorant. Some of them may be out and out deceivers, but they're very ignorant. It's ignorant babbling. Many Reconstructionist Calvinists believe this garbage. Rousas Rushdoony believes this garbage. Rick Godwin comes from this school of garbage. David Chilton believed this garbage. Gary North believed this garbage. Greg Bonson believed this garbage. These people are not garbage salesmen. They give garbage away for free. They are false teachers. At best, they are highly ignorant. Nothing this bad will happen again. Well, things worse than 70 AD have happened, are happening, and will happen. But there will also be a rescue, and in verse 2 of Daniel 12, a resurrection. Notice again the prominence of Michael in Revelation 12, in Daniel chapter 10, and in Daniel chapter 12. Michael, he is there fighting the satanic forces. This is what is happening. Everything you see transpiring in the military and political realm, everything you see happening in the media, is simply a reflection of these prophecies. Now, let's go back to Daniel 10, please. Daniel is terrified. He has to be encouraged angelically not to be afraid in verse 12. The prince of Persia was withstanding me. Michael came. I've come to give you understanding of what will happen to your people in the latter days, for the vision pertains to days yet future. These things did not happen in the lifetime of Daniel. They would partially happen in the intertestamental period, in the period of the Seleucids up to the time of the Hasmoneans. But they did not happen in Daniel's time. When he had spoken to me according to these words, I turned my face towards the ground and became speechless. And behold, one who resembled a human being touched my lips. I opened my mouth and spoke and said to him who was standing before me, O my Lord, as a result of the vision, anguish has come upon me, and I've retained no strength. It caused him great anguish. For how can such a servant of my Lord talk with such as my Lord? For me, there remains now no breath in me, nor has any breath been left in me. This would seem to be a messianic or Christological encounter, a Christophany. It may be angelic, but it's also quite possibly an Old Testament Christophany. Then this one with human appearance touched me again and strengthened me. He said, O man of high esteem, do not be afraid. Shalom alecha, peace be with you. Take courage and be courageous. Now, as soon as he spoke to me, I received strength and said, May my Lord speak, for you have strengthened me. Then he said, Do you understand why I have come to you? But I shall now return to fight against the prince of Persia. So I'm going, and behold, the prince of Greece is about to come. However, I will tell you what is inscribed in the writing of truth. Yet there is no one who stands firmly with me against these forces except Michael, your prince. He begins making references back to Daniel 7 and 8, those visions. Those visions that begin in Daniel 7 and continue into Daniel 8 come into play once again in Revelation 12, the 7 horns and so forth. But let's look. In the first year of Darius the Mede, this is no longer now in the reign of a benevolent Persian, but in the reign of a Mede. The Kurds are the descendants of ancient Medes, traditionally also friendly to the Jews. Not all, but generally. There are Kurdish Jews. I arose to be to be an encouragement and protection for him. And now I'll tell you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings are going to arise in Persia, and a 4th will gain far more riches than all of them. And as soon as he becomes strong through his riches, he will arouse the whole empire against the realm of Greece. And a mighty king will arise and he will rule with great authority and do as he pleases. But as soon as he's risen, his kingdom will be broken up and parceled towards the 4 points of the compass, though not to his own descendants, nor according to his authority which he wielded. For his sovereignty will be uprooted and given to others in addition to him, and then becomes a conflict between the kings of the north and the kings of the south. This was partially fulfilled when the son of Philip of Macedonia, Alexander the Great, arose. At that time, the West, Europe, did not mean the Roman Empire. It did not mean anything other than what we call Yavan, Greece, Hayevanim, the Greeks. That was Western civilization. That was European civilization. That was the West. All of Western civilization. It doesn't matter if it's where it is geographically, the United States, Australia, New Zealand, it all comes indirectly from Greece. The Roman Empire comes from Greece. Although Rome was able to conquer Greece strategically, Greece conquered Rome intellectually and culturally, hence the Greco-Roman. The Greeks conquered the Romans intellectually and culturally, even though the Romans conquered Greece strategically. Hence the Greco-Roman world. Caesar Augustus tried to make Rome the new Athens, and to a degree succeeded. These things happened in the ancient world. There was a conflict between the West, represented by Greece at that time, and the Persians, who later became known as the Parthians. The Parthians resisted the Romans for 3 centuries. There was almost a kind of a Cold War between the two of them. In any event, this standoff went on for some time. All the way into New Testament times, there was the standoff between the Romans and the Persians. But Alexander the Great managed to defeat the Persians. There's a whole history of the Battle of Thermopylae, what happened with the Spartan 300, things of this nature. The Greeks had a qualitative superiority over the Persians. However, remember, the Persians were not Semites. The Persians were ethnically Europeans themselves. It was a European against European conflict ethnically. Okay. You had the Marathon, you had all kinds of battles, the most significant being in Thermopylae, ultimately. But this general that arose, whose kingdom was divided to the 4 directions, was Alexander the Great, the son of Philip of Macedonia, a military genius of the ancient world who understood how to organize troops in terms of regimentation and of units for attack that was specialized. This, of course, was adopted by the Roman legions and others later on, but it was Philip of Macedonia who initially formulated it, at least in the West. This gave Europe, Greece, the West, a strategic superiority to outmaneuver the Persians, who were very, very powerful. Somehow, that kind of conflict takes place once again at the end of the world, at the close of the age. It's recapitulated. It happens again. And after this, there's a conflict between the kings of the north and the kings of the south that comes from this. What you are seeing, be it the illegal immigration of the American border, but more seriously in Europe, this massive influx of Muslims and African Muslims coming across the Mediterranean and coming through Turkey at the behest of Erdogan, who was using them as a political bargaining chip. What's taking place in Italy, the conflict you see taking place in Denmark and Sweden and Holland and in Britain with Islamic immigration, is a conflict between the kings of the north, the kings of the south. As I've attempted to explain before, even before the Iron Curtain came down, there was détente, there was Ostpolitik between East and West Germany. The first North-South war, technically speaking, was the Falklands, at least geographically. But the first Gulf War, the second Gulf War, notice, these are North-South wars, not an East-West war, a North-South war. Okay. It goes on. What happened here happens again. As we continue reading, with the fragmentation of the empire of Alexander, the most important are Seleucus and Ptolemy, who's in the south, Egypt. Ptolemaic astronomy. Okay. That framed the way people thought about astronomy until the time of Galileo and Copernicus. Okay. The Roman Catholic Church tried to preserve Ptolemaic astronomy and called people heretics who agreed with the heliocentric solar system. Be that as it may, this was Ptolemy. The other was Seleucus. From the Seleucids came the dynasty of Antiochus, the first, second, third, fourth. Antiochus the fourth is Antiochus Epiphanes. Antiochus Epiphanes, who epiphany, to make known, okay? Epiphano, like phantom, around seen around, make manifest. But the Hebrews called him Epimanes, meaning he's mad, he's a madman. Up to verse 36 of Daniel 11, we have a historical fulfillment, at least a major portion of it historically fulfilled with Antiochus IV, Antiochus Epiphanes, who would set up the image of himself in the temple during the time of the Maccabees that Jesus referred to at Hanukkah time when you see the abomination spoken of by Daniel. Jesus made it clear that what Antiochus did at Hanukkah, and Jesus was celebrated Hanukkah in John 10, the Feast of Dedication. Jesus made it clear what Antiochus did. The Antichrist was going to do the same, to set up the abomination of desolations. He would set up the Shikutz HaMeshomem. Okay. Now, that's what this is leading to. That's what this is coming to, into chapter 11 and 12. Up to verse 36 of chapter 11. Antiochus does not go beyond verse 36. The Antichrist will come in his character, will recapitulate what he did. My apologies to those who did know this, and he will complete the rest of it. What we are seeing now is the beginning of that recapitulation. I'm not saying an Antichrist figure, the Antichrist, has shown his hand yet, but we need to understand what is happening theologically and prophetically from the Word of God. We need to understand the nature of what is happening. Iran is Persia, that a benevolent leadership in Persia that had been at one time the Medes and the Persians, with Cyrus and Darius and so forth, gave way to something, an entity that will become antithetical. This happened when the Shah fell in the 1970s, after Israel was a nation, and the mullahs came to power under Ayatollah Khomeini. This is what happened. And already, right from the beginning, the United States, courtesy of the Carter administration, was humiliated. It was also reported by Barbara Honecker and others who had no motive to lie that during the presidential campaign of Ronald Reagan against Jimmy Carter, that George Bush Sr. and his henchmen secretly met with Iranians. That is representatives of Khomeini, the mullahs. This is testified to by Barbara Honecker and also by Bani Sadr, who was the interim leader of Iran before the mullahs got full power. Now, these people had no motive to lie that I know of, and they both said it, as well as others, that Ronald Reagan's campaign, the Republican Party, conspired with the Iranian regime not to let the American hostages go until the election was over. The day Reagan was inaugurated, the hostages were released. That was the agreement, according to those who witnessed the meeting. Well, that's what happened. Right after that, the American government, because of the situation in Lebanon being orchestrated by Iran, I was there when about 260 Marines, U.S. Marines, were blown to Kingdom Come. They were deployed in a vulnerable position. The commandant of the Marines testified before the U.S. Senate and apparently lied through his teeth. They were in a highly vulnerable position. And instead of medevacing them to the nearby medical hospitals in Israel, they were medevaced to Cyprus and then on to Wiesbaden in Germany. The Reagan administration did this. But they did something else. Reagan denied it. When caught, he pled senility. He first said he didn't know what was going on. And then when he was questioned and investigated, he basically said, I don't remember, I don't remember, I don't remember. The United States was arming Iran. The United States was arming Iran. This arming of Iran continued with the secret cooperation of the Israelis in order to fight Saddam Hussein. The Iranians and Iraqis were fighting each other. France, Britain, America were all cashing in, selling weapons, even selling weapons to both sides. This kind of subterfuge was not new to the people who Ronald Reagan had in his cabinet, especially George Bush Sr. When George Bush Sr. had been director of the CIA, you had a situation where Andropov, who ran the KGB, he became the party secretary of the Soviet Union, and Bush Sr., who ran the CIA, became the president of the United States. When he was director of the CIA, the notorious Wilson affair took place in Libya, where the United States and American commandos were involved in arming and training Muammar Gaddafi. This involvement of the United States with radical Islam began certainly with the Reagan administration. These are just facts. Began with George Bush, began with Republicans. You had the indictments that followed with Poindexter, the admiral who's now dead. McFarlane was indicted. And they just lied and lied. And Reagan just pled senility. I don't remember. First he denied it, and then he admitted it happened, but said he didn't know about it. And then he just said, I don't remember. And he was allowed to get away with it. Well, that was the beginning. Who else has helped Iran to develop weapons, to acquire its capacity to kill and to do what it's doing? They did it in part to get hostages released who were being held by Iranian proxies in Lebanon. That was part of the motive. Although they denied it and said, we don't negotiate with terrorists. That's exactly what Reagan's government did. And that's been admitted by Reagan. Well, fast forward to the present day. This bloodbath, this shooting of the baby, grabbing of hostages, and they're taking these hostages and they are doing something that they've always done with their own people. The typical strategy of Hamas has always been to attack Israeli civilians, women, children, elderly, whoever, to randomly attack Israeli civilians with Katyusha rockets and so forth, and then use their own civilians as human shields. They would store weapons, Katyusha rockets, in the basement of schools, hospitals. They would fire them from civilian residential areas, making collateral damage inevitable. So they would shoot at Israeli civilians, towns like Sderot and so forth. And when the Israelis were forced to fire back in self-defense, there would inevitably be collateral damage, killing Arab, Muslim, Gaza civilians. The Hamas would attack Israeli civilians, including women, children, and then use their own women and children as human shields. Confident that the mainstream media, the BBC as in bias, blasphemy, and cowardice, CNN as in the cable news network, etc., would come in and say, look what the Jews did. That was part of their game. That's always been their game. Now, however, they have abducted Israeli civilians, again, women, children, some soldiers, and are dispersing them into Gaza. So that if the Israelis attack targets in Gaza, they will not know if there are Israeli hostages in those buildings. Today, the Wall Street Journal has reported what we said and some others said yesterday, that Iran has orchestrated this, that the Iranian Revolutionary Guard has been preparing for it for some time. There's no question about it. The Wall Street Journal is right. These reports are right. Iran have sponsored and paid for this. Iran have sponsored and paid for this. They have provided the weapons, the training, and put up the money. Iran has funded this and is funding this. Barack Obama and Joe Biden have funded Iran. $6 billion last week to Iran. $6 billion in exchange again for hostages, he said. $6 billion. Barack Obama, of course, gave $150 billion in frozen assets, supposedly negotiated to stop the development of nuclear weapons. Well, one, it has not stopped the development of nuclear weapons. And two, he did it while Iran was the world's biggest sponsor of terror, engaged in killing Americans. Their primary agent was General Soleimani, who was killed by Donald Trump. I'm not making a political statement or a campaign statement in favor of Donald Trump. I'm simply saying Trump killed him. Obama funded them. The sponsors of Hamas and of Hezbollah are the Iranians. The sponsors of the Iranians are the United States government and the European Union. Even as we speak, the Palestinian Authority, which indoctrinates its children in schools to kill Jews and to be suicide bombers in their curriculum, and it's known. The Biden administration takes money out of your pocket and funds it. He funds the Palestinian Authority to do this, to propagate hatred and indoctrinate children. These children will die. They groom them to be suicide bombers in many cases. In the war between Iran and Iraq, they were sending children in human wave attack, the way St. Bernard did in the Crusades with the Children's Crusades. Same idea. You're going to go to heaven. Be a martyr. What right does a corrupt American government have to take your money and mine and give it to people like that, to radical Muslims? What right did Barack Obama have to unfreeze 150 billion and give it to the Iranians when their economy was in trouble? When people began to rise up against the mullahs, Barack Obama did nothing. He essentially let the mullahs continue. Now, we've seen this kind of treachery and betrayal before. I often remember after September 11th, Bush Jr., George Bush, the president, allowing the express visa programs for the Saudi Arabians to continue, even though most of the September 11th terrorists were Saudi Arabians, and we know where the funding came from, and that there were elements of the Saudi government involved in it. 28 pages that they still don't want us to see. Telling you that the Saudi Arabians are our friends and Islam is a religion of peace. This is the Bush dynasty. I'm not saying Republicans are any better. Certainly not the rhinos, not the establishment Republicans. Trump, yes. Bush, the Republican Party, no. Reagan, no. He did the same thing. Only Obama and Biden have done it on a bigger scale, much bigger. $150 billion handed over by Barack Obama with John Kerry, Hillary Clinton, and Joe Biden to the world's biggest sponsors of terror, Iran. Last week, $6 billion handed over by Joe Biden to Iran. The funders, the sponsors of Hamas who are doing this. You see what's happening? Dragging those kids out and killing them? Stripping that German woman naked and murdering her and parading her around on the back of a truck? Putting a bullet through a baby's head? Abducting children and using them as human hostages? You see that? Who paid for it? Joe Biden. Oh, there's blood guilt. Raisi is responsible in Iran. Ibrahim Raisi. Khomeini, the mullah, is responsible. Undoubtedly, Nasrallah has a hand in it, and certainly Hamas. Yes, they're responsible. But who paid for it? Who sponsored it? Iran. Who sponsors Iran? The Biden administration. The Joe Obama administration. But there's enough guilt to go around. I just don't blame Biden. I just don't blame Obama. I blame Blumenthal, Schumer, the late Feinstein. I blame the American Jews in the same party with Tlaib and Olmert, who pander to Linda Sarsour, who support an administration that funds radical Islamic extremism in the West Bank and writes $150 billion checks to the Iranians so they can sponsor terror. I blame the American Jews who vote Democrat. You are a stupid, stupid person. Why don't you just sew a yellow star on your jacket and buy yourself a ticket to Auschwitz, you dumb schlemazel? But Schumer's home in Brooklyn. Axelrod is home in Chicago. Blinken is home in Washington. It's the Jews of Israel who are paying the price for what American Jews have done in betraying their own people. They betrayed America and they betrayed Israel. They betrayed their own families and their own people. They're in a party with Omrit and Tliap. Why, of all people, would a Jew support that? I am not a Republican. I'm an independent, and I have no love for the Republican Party. I have a love for America. I have a love for Israel, but I have no love whatsoever for the Republican Party. I'm not making a political statement, but I am stating a political fact. Iran is and has been, and everybody knows, including the Pentagon and the CIA, including MI6, everybody knows. NATO knows. The Arab League knows. The Israelis know. Everybody knows Iran is the #1 sponsor of radical Islamic terror, including Hamas and Hezbollah. Everybody knows that. And everybody knows the United States government, the Joe Obama administration, Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, John Kerry, and Sleazy Joe are the #1 sponsors of Iran. There are demonic powers on back of this. But they are not just the demonic powers in Tehran or in Gaza. They are the demonic powers in the Oval Office and on Capitol Hill in the United States and in Brussels in the EU headquarters. This kind of treachery and betrayal goes beyond Chamberlainism. It goes beyond appeasement and funding the sponsors of terror. What you see happening was paid for. Paid for with money that came from the United States government, from Biden and Obama. This is the realities. This is what we are dealing with. The media will not tell you what's in the Word of God. They have no clue as to what Daniel 10 means. And the media is not telling you the truth about who's responsible for this. Are there intelligence failures? Yes. The main failure is probably not Mossad and probably not Shin Bet. There are 3 main Israeli intelligence organizations. Shin Bet is counterintelligence, internal security. Mossad is external intelligence. Military intelligence is called Amin. While Shin Bet and Mossad have good and sometimes legendary track records. Amin, military intelligence, in the Israeli military, has never been all that good. It certainly was not good in 1973. 50 years ago, this very time of year, the same thing happened. A surprise attack on Yom Kippur. This time it was Simchat Torah, on a Shabbat. Same thing. They weren't ready then, they're not ready now. Iran's motives to do it now? They're afraid of a rapprochement and possible alliance between Israel and Saudi Arabia. That is an obvious motive. Because of the spinelessness and corruption of the Biden administration, they saw an opportunity. Everybody knows, whether you like them or not, had Donald Trump been president, Putin would not have invaded the Ukraine, and the Taliban, who are now doing business with China and Putin, would not have taken over Afghanistan. Everybody knows that. It was Biden who caused this. Biden, that useless clown he has for a Secretary of Defense, Austin, that general who should die in Leavenworth in the reckoning of many people, collaborating with the Chinese in violation of the chain of command, Miley, Jake Sullivan, Susan Rice, and above all, Blinken, who's a Jew. This is horrible. This is absolutely horrible. Was there an intelligence failure? Yeah, same as in 1973. There was. Probably mainly by military intelligence more than Mossad or Shin Bet, although I'm sure a blame can be apportioned equitably. There was one person who warned, or tried to, but they weren't reporting his warnings. They were too busy reporting his bogus trial in New York, being charged with crimes that didn't happen. No bank, no lending institution didn't get paid. There was no fraud. Everybody got their money. Yet, with political motivations, being charged with a crime by Letitia James, a racist who admitted she wanted to be attorney general to pursue a political agenda and should have been disbarred. The media was happy to report this bogus indictment of Donald Trump in Georgia and in New York, but they were not happy to report what he was warning about. He did warn the danger about what Biden was doing in writing that $6 billion check. Well, once they got the money, it didn't take them any more than 72 hours to give the go-ahead to Hamas. And if you're an American Jew, you ought to be ashamed of yourself. If you're an American Jew who voted for that party, you're a disgrace. I feel sorry for those Jews. My son was in the Israeli army, in a combat brigade, volunteered for combat, later transferred to the legal corps because he was a lawyer by profession. My son was there in the last war. I know what it's like to have a son in that situation. I know what it's like when you're there when an attack is happening. I've seen some terrible attacks. In Jerusalem, right where I was standing a few minutes later, 17 people were blown to Kingdom Come on a bus, not 10 minutes after I left. Throwing hand grenades into a toy store where my wife used to take my children when they were babies to buy toys, aiming for children. I've seen that stuff. I know what it is. I've seen terror and murder in Northern Ireland, but the barbarism of militant Islam is 10 times worse. What happened in Omagh in Ireland that's typical of the way radical Islam operates. The only difference is Uncle Sam picks up the bill. That's what you voted for. You voted for the death of your own people. You voted for the betrayal of your country, America. You voted for Schumer. You voted for Biden. You voted for Obama. You voted for another Holocaust. That's what you voted for. You have a sick, perverted mind. I'm angry at all liberals who can't see the reality. But I'm especially angry having a Jewish Israeli family at the Jews who vote for it. It's not just Israel that's been betrayed, it's America. We were betrayed by the Bush administration, we were lied to by the Reagan administration, and we were super betrayed by Barack Obama and now Biden. And now you see what's happening. Well, I'll tell you something. Before September 11th, I warned, as did many people, Steve Emerson, the filmmaker, being another. What they're doing in Israel, they will do in America. That was before September 11th. You see what they're doing in Israel? Well, they will do that in Europe, in Britain, and in America. There will be a conflict between Greece and Persia, between the West and Iran. Unfortunately, the President of the United States is on the side of the Iranians. Talk is cheap. Don't watch what politicians say. Watch what they do. Here's what they do. Here's what Obama did. Here's what Biden did. Here's what John Kerry did. Here's what Hillary Clinton did. Here's what Jake Sullivan did. Here's what Susan Rice did. Here's what Valerie Jarrett did. Here's what Austin did. How much you need? That's what's really happened. But don't expect anybody in the media or the government to tell you the truth. There are demonic powers at work. Very few are telling you the prophetic significance of what is happening. Wars and rumors of wars, yes, but specifically involving Israel and involving Persia, it happened before and it will happen again. This tells us a number of things. One, persecution of the church is drawing nearer. Two, the advent of the Antichrist is drawing nearer. It is these things saved Christians should be aware of. Unfortunately, few of us are. This is the reality. Hamas, Israel, Iran, and prophecy. What does the word of God say? If you want to hear lies, turn on the mainstream media. They'll lie to you all day long. That's what they get paid for. They're in the lie industry. If you want to hear lies, listen to a White House briefing. They'll lie to you all day long. They're more than happy to lie. It's the only thing they're good at. They're not competent at anything else. The only thing they're really good at is lying to you. If you want the truth, my friends, read this book. I would pray in earnest that the Lord's hand would protect Israel this time. We have members of our ministry in Israel in both Galilee and Jerusalem that were in the shelters, and they have sons in the military. Most Israeli believers, young people out of high school, men, boys, the Israeli military is organized into Kravi and Lo Kravi, combat and support roles, logistics, things like this. My son volunteered for combat. All lawyers wear glasses. They wouldn't let him be a paratrooper. They put him into tanks. He wanted to be a fighter, even though he was a lawyer. They transferred him later on because he spoke English and they needed English-speaking lawyers to refute the lies and biases of the Western media and things like that. There was a branch of the legal called Practitut, and he had to go into Practitut. They needed English-speaking lawyers. So they took him out of a tank. Most Jewish believing young people, the sons of believers in Israel, volunteer to be Kravi. They volunteer for combat units. They believe it's part of their testimony. Unlike the religious cowards, the Hasidim, who don't serve in the army. They stay in a yeshiva and get paid for it, while Jews, better than themselves, defend the land and the people. Yet the Orthodox Jews, the rabbis, curse the Jewish believers. I remember when the Nixon administration ordered American citizens to leave Israel 50 years ago when the same thing happened, the Yom Kippur War in 1973. It was all over the front pages of the newspapers. Long lines of Hasidic Jews with their hats and their payouts getting on airplanes back to New York, going to Brooklyn. They were leaving the country left and right. Jewish believers stayed and fought, yet it's the Jewish believers who are hated and despised. Well, these yeshiva boys, these cowardly Jews, self-righteous religious hypocrites who hate believing Jews, won't put on a uniform. Some of the more moderate Orthodox called Hesed Yeshiva will, but the ultra-Orthodox will not. And it's the ultra-Orthodox who you see in Yad Lachim and these organizations, Operation Judaism, that hate and persecute Jewish believers. The injustices are unbelievable. I would ask you to pray for Israel at this time. We are told to, in Hebrew, means inquire into the welfare. Shalu Shalom Yerushalayim. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. They will prosper who love thee. Shalu Shalom Yerushalayim. Inquire into the welfare. We are also told, Hine lo yanum v'lo yishan shomer Israel. He who keepeth Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. Satan will not succeed in destroying Israel and the Jewish people. They will be there for the return of Christ when they look upon him who they have pierced, and mourn as one mourns for an only son. The devil will not be able to stop it, but it's not for a lack of trying, especially when he has presidents of the United States picking up the bill for it. Please pray for Israel. Please pray that Hezbollah does not attack, and if it does, that the Lord will somehow give a speedy victory to the Israelis. What Hezbollah is capable of is far worse than anything you've seen Hamas do. And Hezbollah is likewise, via Nasrallah, controlled from Iran. And not least of all, pray for the believers in Israel and for the believers in the military. We also need to pray for the hostages who've been abducted and are being used as human shields. I may sound angry because I am. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Lord God, despite their sin and their rejection of your Son, their Messiah, you tell us they remain beloved for the sake of their fathers, for the sake of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Abraham, Isaac, Yaakov. Thank you, Lord God, that he who keeps Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. Keep your hand upon your ancient people and bless Israel at this time. Even send Michael, your angel, to protect them from the prince of Persia, Lord God. Use this terrible situation that Jews will see the hypocrisy and the spiritual and ethical bankruptcy of the rabbis and look elsewhere for truth, and may they find that truth in the risen Lord, Yeshua, who took their sin, died their death, to give them and us his life. Protect those soldiers, Lord, and protect particularly the believers, the soldiers who are the children and grandchildren of believers, Lord, of which there are many, which we know many. Even people in our own ministry. Moriel, please, Lord, protect them and be with them. Avinu Malkeinu, Alpha Pisha Hemno Mamanim Be Yeshua, Meshichenu, HaMashiach HaNachon Shel Yisrael, Ana Adonai, Tehagen Otam, Tizgor Avraham, Yitzhak, VeYaakov, וגם כן תהגן את המאמינים בצבא ישראל בקרבי. אבא, אני מבקש ממך למנוע איזה קרב בצפון מחיזבאללה גם כן. אבל אם יש איזה מלחמה בצפון, בנוסף, תתן ניצחון לעם ישראל. עם ישראל חי, מפני שאלוהי ישראל, אלוהי אברהם, יצחק ויעקב, הוא חי. אתה חי. בשם ישוע המשיח, אדוננו, גואלנו וצדקתנו, אני מתפלל. Amen. Thank you so much for listening. Please keep these things in prayer. And may God raise his hand against all the enemies of Israel. That includes the ones who are in the corridors of power in Europe and in Washington. Thank you so much.